Everyone at Lincoln High thought old Mr. Johnson was just a nobody. He was the janitor, always silent, moving slowly, his hands trembling as he pushed the mop bucket down the hall. His faded uniform smelled faintly of bleach, and his shoes squeaked softly on the polished floors. Day after day, year after year, he was there. Most people didn't even notice him. He was just part of the background. Students laughed at him behind his back. Some even made cruel jokes to his face. Why is this old guy still working here? Shouldn't he be in a nursing home? Others whispered cruel stories about him, that he was too poor to retire, that he probably had no family. Some even claimed he slept in the school basement. None of it was true, but no one cared enough to ask. Teachers ignored him, parents passed by without even noticing. To everyone, he was invisible. But what no one knew was that Mr. Johnson carried a secret so powerful, so heartbreaking, that when it finally came out, the entire town fell silent. One day, everything changed. It was a normal Wednesday afternoon. The cafeteria was crowded. Students were laughing, shouting, trading food, scrolling on their phones. Trays clattered, soda cans hissed open, music leaked from earbuds. It was chaos, the kind of loud, ordinary chaos that happened every day at lunch. And into that chaos walked Mr. Johnson. His steps were slow. He pushed his mop bucket across the floor, glancing around for spills. His face was pale, his back slightly bent, but his eyes scanned carefully, always making sure no one slipped. A group of popular kids noticed him. They were sitting at the center table, the table where only the loudest, boldest kids sat. "Hey, look, it's Grandpa Mop," one of them yelled, pointing. "Don't slip, old man," another shouted. Their laughter echoed across the cafeteria. Heads turned, phones went up, cameras recording, screens glowing, ready to capture humiliation for likes and shares. Mr. Johnson froze for a moment. He didn't say a word. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders slumped, as if the weight of the entire room pressed down on him. He turned slightly, as if he might leave. But then one boy, taller than the rest, with a cruel smile on his face, shouted something that went too far. "Why don't you just die already? You're useless!" The entire cafeteria went silent. Forks stopped clinking against plates, music cut off as kids pulled out their earbuds. Everyone stared, waiting for a reaction. Mr. Johnson's eyes filled with tears. His lips trembled. For a second, it looked like he might speak. But instead, he lowered his head, gripped the mop handle tighter, and slowly turned away. His shoes squeaked against the floor as he pushed his bucket out of the cafeteria. No one followed him. The silence didn't last. Within seconds, the cafeteria erupted again, but this time with whispers. Some students laughed nervously. Others felt a pang of guilt. A few shook their heads, but no one said a word in his defense. That night, Mr. Johnson didn't go home the way he usually did. He stayed late, alone in the halls, cleaning classrooms after everyone had left. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, and the empty building seemed colder than usual. He paused for a long time at one classroom door, looking inside at the rows of desks, his eyes distant as though he was seeing ghosts from the past. Then he sighed and returned to work. Meanwhile, in the principal's office, something unusual happened. The school phone rang late in the evening. The principal picked up, expecting a parent complaint, but the voice on the other end was calm, official, and direct. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, the principal leaned back in his chair, frowning deeply. He looked down at the name written on a piece of paper in front of him. His eyes widened slightly. Then he picked up his own phone and made another call. The next morning, when students gathered outside before class, they noticed something strange. A black SUV pulled up in front of the school. Its windows were tinted, its engine low and steady. Doors opened, and out stepped 2 men in uniform. Military uniforms, clean, pressed, with medals gleaming on their chests. Whispers spread instantly. "Who are they? What's going on? Why are soldiers here? The two men walked straight past the crowd of students, ignoring the stares, and headed into the school. A few minutes later, the doors opened again, and there was Mr. Johnson. The old janitor, the man everyone mocked, stood quietly as the two officers approached him, and then, in front of the entire school, they extended their hands and shook his. Everyone froze. "What's going on?" someone whispered. "Why are they here for him?" another muttered. The kids who had mocked him just yesterday now stared in shock. Phones were out again, but this time no one was laughing. Everyone felt the tension, the weight of something they didn't understand. Because the truth about Mr. Johnson was finally coming out.
The school courtyard was silent as the two men in uniform stood beside Mr. Johnson. Students crowded closer, their eyes wide, their whispers sharp and curious. One of the officers, tall with silver hair, looked at Mr. Johnson with respect that no one at the school had ever seen before. He spoke in a steady voice, just loud enough for the nearby students to hear. "Sir, it's been an honor to finally meet you in person." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Sir, why would a decorated military officer address a janitor like that?" The officer reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He handed it to Mr. Johnson. The old man's hand shook as he took it, his eyes instantly clouded with emotion. A few students managed to see the picture. It showed a group of young soldiers in dusty uniforms, smiling despite the dirt on their faces. And there, right in the middle, was a much younger version of Mr. Johnson. No one spoke. Finally, the shorter officer turned to the principal and asked, "May we use the auditorium?" Within minutes, the entire school was seated. The principal, confused but cooperative, gave the officers the stage. Mr. Johnson sat in the front row, his mop bucket left forgotten in the hall. The taller officer addressed the crowd. "You all know him as your janitor, the man who cleans your floors, empties your trash, and keeps your school safe at night. But what you don't know is that he once kept an entire country safe." The students leaned forward. The teachers, who had never paid much attention to Mr. Johnson either, now stared in disbelief. The officer continued, "Mr. Harold Johnson is not just a janitor. He is Sergeant Harold Johnson of the United States Army, a decorated war hero, a man who decades ago led his unit through one of the most dangerous missions of the war." He paused, letting the words sink in. The students whispered among themselves, "War hero? This frail old man who pushed a mop every day?" The officer nodded toward Johnson. "He won't tell you himself. He never does. But the world needs to remember men like him." He began to tell the story. Years ago, when Mr. Johnson was young, he was stationed overseas. His unit faced impossible odds. Trapped behind enemy lines, outnumbered and outgunned, survival seemed hopeless. But Johnson, then just 23 years old, refused to give up. Sergeant Johnson carried two of his men on his shoulders through gunfire. He dragged another through the mud for over a mile while wounded himself. He risked his life again and again to save others. The officer's voice grew heavier. When the dust settled, he had saved 12 men. 12 lives alive because of him. And when reinforcements finally arrived, they found Sergeant Johnson bloodied and barely standing, refusing to leave until he knew every one of his men was safe. The auditorium was so quiet that even a dropped pin would have echoed. Students who had laughed at him days before now sat frozen, guilt burning in their chests. Mr. Johnson looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once carried men through fire and chaos. He didn't smile. He didn't bask any attention. He just shook his head slowly, as if the memories were too heavy to bear. The officer continued. For his actions, Sergeant Johnson was awarded the Silver Star. But he never told anyone here. He chose to live quietly, to work humbly, to spend his days serving others in a different way, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. A student in the back suddenly shouted, "Why didn't you tell us?" All eyes turned to Mr. Johnson. He rose slowly from his seat, gripping the armrest for support. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft but steady. "I didn't want to be remembered for what I did in war. I wanted to be remembered for the little things, for keeping a school clean so kids don't slip, for making sure you all have a safe place to learn. That is enough for me." Silence. Absolute silence. Some students felt their eyes sting with tears. Even the teachers shifted uncomfortably, ashamed of how they had dismissed him all these years. The taller officer stepped forward once more. This man lived a life of sacrifice and honor. And yesterday, I heard that some of you mocked him, laughed at him, told him he was useless. He let the words hang in the air. The students squirmed in their seats. A few lowered their heads, unable to meet Mr. Johnson's eyes. "But let me tell you something," the officer said, his voice sharp now. "There is not a single person in this room who has done as much for their country, for their fellow man, as Harold Johnson has. Not one." His words struck like thunder. The students sat stunned, guilt and admiration mixing in their hearts. The same kids who had filmed themselves laughing at him yesterday now fought the urge to delete their videos, to hide their shame. Mr. Johnson slowly stood again. He looked at the crowd, his eyes tired but kind. He said, "I don't need your apologies. Just treat people better. You never know what someone has lived through. You never know what battles they've already fought."
For a long moment after Mr. Johnson's words, the auditorium remained silent. Hundreds of students, teachers, and staff sat frozen, their eyes fixed on the man they thought they knew, but truly never did. Somewhere in the back row, a phone buzzed with a notification. Nobody reached for it. For once, not a single student was distracted. All attention remained on the frail figure standing at the front, hands folded, eyes glistening. The principal finally stepped forward, his voice shaky. "Mr. Johnson, Sergeant Johnson, on behalf of this school, I want to apologize." He looked around at the crowd, his face red with shame. "We have failed you. We let our children treat you with disrespect. We ourselves did not give you the honor you deserve. That ends today." The audience stirred. Students shifted in their seats, guilt pressing down on their shoulders. The ones who had mocked him the loudest now felt the sharpest sting. One of them, the tall boy who had shouted the cruelest words in the cafeteria, stood up slowly. His face was pale, his lips trembling. For the first time, he seemed smaller, his arrogance gone. "I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson," he muttered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know. I had no idea who you were, what you did." Mr. Johnson's gaze fell on him, but there was no anger, only quiet sadness. "You don't need to apologize to me," he said softly. "Just learn from this. Treat others with kindness, not because of what they might have done, but because it's the right thing to do." The boy sank back into his seat, tears welling in his eyes. Word of what happened in the auditorium spread quickly. By the end of the day, the entire town knew. Videos were uploaded online. But this time, they weren't mocking clips meant for quick laughs. They were recordings of the officer shaking Mr. Johnson's hand, of the students listening in stunned silence, of the janitor revealing his past. Within hours, the videos had thousands of views. Comments poured in. A true hero. I can't believe he worked there all these years and no one knew. Shame on those kids, but thank God the truth came out. The next morning, when Mr. Johnson arrived at school, things were different. For the first time in decades, students didn't look through him, they looked at him. They opened doors for him, smiled at him, greeted him with genuine respect. "Good morning, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for everything you do, sir." He nodded politely, though he seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. At lunch, the cafeteria was quiet when he entered, not because of fear, but because every student stood up from their seats. One by one, they clapped. The sound grew, echoing against the walls, filling the room. Mr. Johnson froze, gripping his mop handle for support, his lips parting in shock. His eyes filled with tears as he realized what was happening. For the first time, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't mocked. He was honored. The boy who had insulted him the most walked forward and extended his hand. His friends followed, awkward but sincere. "I'm sorry," he whispered, again, louder this time. "Thank you for everything." Mr. Johnson took the boy's hand. His grip was weak, but his voice was steady. "Be better than I was. Not on the battlefield. In here." He tapped the boy's chest, right over his heart. That moment spread like wildfire online. Clips of students applauding an old janitor went viral across the country. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines read, "High school students learned their janitor was a war hero." From mockery to respect, the secret life of Sergeant Harold Johnson. A lesson in humanity every teen should hear. Suddenly, the man no one noticed became a symbol, not just for the town, but for countless strangers who saw his story online. Parents began telling their children to respect everyone, no matter their job, no matter their age. Teachers started using Mr. Johnson's story as an example in class, and for the students at Lincoln High, life truly changed. Where once they had been quick to judge, now they hesitated. They thought twice before mocking, before whispering, before spreading rumors. Mr. Johnson had taught them a lesson no textbook ever could.
Weeks passed, but the story of Mr. Johnson did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. What began as whispers in the school turned into headlines across the nation. Reporters arrived at Lincoln High, cameras flashing, eager to capture the humble janitor who had once carried men through fire and death. But Johnson himself wanted none of it. Whenever someone tried to interview him, he shook his head politely. "I did what any man should have done, that's all." He still pushed his mop down the halls every day, still emptied the trash bins, still fixed broken lockers. To him, nothing had changed, but for everyone else, everything had. One Friday morning, the principal made an announcement over the intercom. "Students and staff, please join us in the gymnasium at noon. We have something important to share." Curiosity buzzed through the halls. At noon, the entire school gathered. Teachers filled the bleachers, students whispered nervously, and in the center of the gym stood a podium draped in the American flag. The doors opened, and Mr. Johnson entered slowly, leaning on his mop handle as if it were a cane. The applause was immediate. It roared through the gym, loud, unrelenting, shaking the very walls. Mr. Johnson's eyes widened. He had never seen so many people looking at him, really seeing him with admiration instead of dismissal. The mayor of the town stepped forward to the podium. "Today we honor a man who lived among us quietly, humbly, without asking for recognition. A man who saved lives, served his country, and then continued to serve our community with the same humility. Today, we rename Lincoln High's gymnasium in his honor. From this day forward, it will be known as the Harold Johnson Hall. Gasps filled the gym. Students clapped harder. Some even whistled. Others wiped their eyes. Mr. Johnson stood frozen, his hands trembling. He whispered to himself, This is too much. But it wasn't over. The mayor stepped aside, and the tall officer from weeks before approached the microphone. His voice was steady, but thick with emotion. There are men alive today, fathers, grandfathers, husbands, because of this man. Some couldn't be here, but their children, their families, they wanted to send a message. He held up a stack of letters, dozens of them. These are from the sons and daughters of the men you saved, Sergeant Johnson. They want you to know that your sacrifice changed their lives. They exist today because of you. The officer handed the letters to him. Mr. Johnson's hand shook as he clutched them to his chest. Tears spilled down his cheeks, running through the deep lines of his face. He sat down slowly, overwhelmed, whispering, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve this. From the bleachers, a voice called out, Yes, you do. It was the tall boy who had once mocked him the cruelest. He was standing now, his face red with emotion. You deserve all of it, Mr. Johnson. You're the reason I'll never treat anyone like that again. The boy's voice broke, but he didn't sit down. He kept standing, and slowly others rose with him, dozens of students, then the entire school. They stood in silence, a tribute more powerful than any cheer. Mr. Johnson looked out at the sea of faces. For decades, he had walked these halls unseen, unheard, unnoticed, and now every eye was on him. Every heart understood his worth. He wiped his tears and whispered, barely audible, Thank you. The ceremony ended, but the change did not. Students began volunteering, helping the elderly, reaching out to veterans in the community. They carried his lesson forward, a lesson not written in textbooks, but in humility, sacrifice, and quiet strength. Months later, Mr. Johnson retired. The school threw him a farewell celebration, but in his heart, he still believed he was just the janitor. He never saw himself as the hero everyone else did. And maybe that was the truest sign of greatness. Because real heroes don't ask for recognition. They don't demand respect. They simply give, sacrifice, and keep going, even when the world looks away. And though Mr. Johnson's mop no longer rolled down the halls of Lincoln High, the echoes of his footsteps and the lessons he left behind would never be forgotten.